Welcome back to the Situation Room, the weekly show on worldwide conflicts where we turn geopolitical hope core into nightmarish nope core. Yes, please. Today, I'll be answering your burning questions alongside our head writer, Evan. Sadly, our editor-in-chief, Morris, won't be joining us this week. He got invited to a lunch at the Eritrean embassy, and we haven't heard from him since.
I mean, how can he be the one if he's dead?
However, just joking, he's just on holiday. Thank you to everybody who submitted questions for this episode, and in the event that yours isn't included in the day's episode, I mean, it's probably not. There's a lot of you, and there's only, well, 2 of us this week. But don't lose hope. We'll be keeping loads of them in reserve and even turning a few of them into episodes. Dedicated episodes of their own, so that's fancy. Stay tuned. Our first question comes from ManiaMax1613. Is China actually prepared for war with Taiwan and the West? The collision between one of their destroyers and one of their Coast Guard vessels makes me question their leadership's professionalism and training standards. And Evan, with the big brain, answers this. Great question and great reference to an incident that's given a lot of people a nice chuckle over the last couple of weeks. For anybody who missed it, what ManiaMac is referring to is a collision that took place near the disputed Scarborough Shoal a couple of weeks ago in the South China Sea. Basically, a vessel from China's Coast Guard was chasing after a vessel from the Philippine Coast Guard when another Chinese ship, this one from China's Navy, cut across their path behind the Philippine ship and then got slammed into by the ship from the Chinese Coast Guard. Whoops-a-daisy, the whole thing was captured on video, and it's worth a watch. Indeed, you'll be watching it right now if you're watching this and we didn't get a copyright claim. I mean, pretty sure this is fair use. As for whether the collision indicates a broader issue for China, it's certainly possible that Chinese military ship captains could be a liability for the country's military ambitions. That being said, drawing that conclusion from a single incident like this would risk overgeneralizing what may also just be an isolated mistake. It is the same problem that we see with perceptions around air travel. Every time there is a major plane crash, it's the subject of reporting for days or even weeks, but it's not as if global media gives similar coverage to every flight that just goes seamlessly from beginning to end. Similarly, these kinds of confrontations between Chinese and Philippines vessels happen all the time, and while it's not the first time that Chinese ships have collided with other vessels in the area, sometimes seems to be intentionally, it is the first time that 2 Chinese chaser ships have crashed oh so spectacularly. If we were playing the odds, then it's more likely that Beijing happened to just dispatch a couple of ship captains who were knobs and had them sail around in the same vicinity than all Chinese ship captains being knobs. Now, the latter option is certainly plausible. The people who made the decisions that caused these ships to collide could just be perfectly average leaders within China's maritime forces. But if the average leader is the type to crash their ships into other Chinese ships, not just because of some operator error or an understandable slip-up, but because of carelessness or poor training, then we'd expect to see a higher rate of incidents like this, considering how often Chinese vessels are out on patrol together in this part of the world. So, although we've joined the rest of the world in having a good laugh over this incident, it is difficult to draw the conclusion that the collision represents the quality of all of China's maritime officers, when recent history shows that the crash is just an outlier. Next up, Tic Tac Cadillac. Fantastic name. What little-known conflict is most likely to trigger World War III? Because there are a lot of them, with a lot of countries having their puppets involved. Firstly, fantastic username. Nice that Evan agrees with me on that. And secondly, we've got to go with the little-known civil conflicts that frequently flare up in Ethiopia. Now, names like Tigray or the Amhara aren't really known to global audiences outside fairly hardcore geopolitical spaces like this one. Hello there, friends. And to be clear, we're not arguing that the great powers of the world are about to dive headfirst into World War III because of a couple of warring tribes who can't settle their differences peacefully. Instead, we spotlight Ethiopia's civil conflicts because even though they barely ever draw the notice of international media, especially when the Ethiopian government takes a backseat role, they're never more than a few missteps away from setting off a much larger cascade. In all of the world, even including the Middle East, there's nowhere that's quite so much of a powder keg as the African Horn. The region borders the critical trade routes of the Red Sea, where we've already seen Yemen's Houthi rebels have an outsized impact. Ethiopia and Egypt are never far from all-out conflict, given Ethiopia's control over the Nile River, and a conflict involving Egypt and Ethiopia could very quickly draw the attention of major powers. The Sudan conflict is at risk of spilling over, Somalia is teetering on the brink, the Emirates have major interests tied up just about everywhere, and the global gold market cannot survive as it's currently organized without stability in this region. Worst of all, a major breakdown in any one of these areas is likely to have cascading effects on all the others, and it's Ethiopia that sits at the literal and the figurative center of the entire region. So while an inter-clan Ethiopian conflict won't spiral into World War III overnight, the frequent internal wars in Ethiopia are one of those terribly underreported sparks with the potential to set a much larger fire off. If the dominoes do fall just right, then internal conflicts in Ethiopia can spiral into a regional conflict that threatens the global gold trade, the Suez Canal, and a large share of the world's oil population all at the same time. If that's not the sort of thing that the modern world would go to war over, then we're not going to go to war over anything, are we? Next up from Ian Hamilton 213, why are you not suggesting Europe and Ukraine conditions for peace talks that Putin stands down, as he is the one who started this whole thing? Plus, what will it take to bring him down, as I wonder why the oligarchs haven't risen up? Appreciate the content and stuff you guys put out. Keep it up. Thank you so much. It's a good question, and it is a particularly salient one at the moment, as Ukraine has started to signal openness to negotiations on territory that would start with the boundaries formed by the current front line. Now, we at WarFronts have been consistent since the Ukraine war began that Russia's invasion is unjustified, it is a war of expansion, and whether in wartime or peacetime, we do not trust Putin as far as we could throw him. Now, I think I could throw Putin quite far. I trust him less than that. But we often see arguments that Ukraine shouldn't accept any peace terms short of a Russian withdrawal from all of Ukraine's territory, and we always find ourselves asking, in what world does that sound like a realistic possibility? Look, if we lived in a just and fair geopolitical order, then the mad dictator who decided to march hundreds of thousands of troops into Ukraine would be forced to return Ukrainian territory to Ukrainians as a part of any peace accord. But if we lived in a just and fair geopolitical order, then this war wouldn't be happening. In our coverage, we prefer to stay rooted in the principles of realpolitik. We explain global affairs not as a matter of morality or ideology, but as a matter of national and personal interests, guiding national and personal actions. Whether or not it would be right for Vladimir Putin to stand down, we're very confident in saying that he's not going to stand down and relinquish his territory unless it were to be in his interests to do so. Ukraine and its international partners can do that in either one of two ways. Either convince Putin that horrible things will happen to him if he doesn't give up that territory, or convince him that he's going to get all sorts of nice rewards if he does. But as of now, Ukraine doesn't have the military strength to push Russia off that land by force, and Ukraine's allies aren't willing to help in that effort militarily, or credibly threaten substantial enough punishment that Putin would actually consider pulling his troops out. If Ukraine can't incentivize Putin to choose to abandon that land one way or the other, then suggesting that Putin should just be asked to give it up is just a waste of breath. It would just drag out peace talks and be a waste of valuable time. Next up, Mike MZ1GY asks, why is the US not trying to tie down China in Myanmar? Making a Vietnam or Afghanistan type situation for the US's biggest rival seems kind of obvious. Okay, so let's lead off with saying, how confident are you that that's not already happening? Right now, there is no credible evidence in the public domain to indicate that US intelligence is active on the ground in Myanmar. But this is US intelligence we're talking about, and until proven otherwise, we should assume that American, Chinese, and other intelligence services have at least a light touch on the ground in any major conflict abroad. As for why the US isn't committing the resources that would be necessary to lure China into a Vietnam or Afghanistan-style conflict, the primary reason is that China just doesn't deploy its troops in Myanmar like America deployed into Vietnam, Afghanistan, Korea, Iraq, and other conflict zones where it dealt with local enemies sponsored by a powerful adversary. China doesn't do those sorts of foreign deployments, even on its own doorstep in Myanmar. Instead, it prefers to rely on its proxy militias, its allies in Myanmar's military government, and its ability to exert economic leverage against both sides in the war to gain the concessions that it wants. That's still an environment where US intelligence or other global intelligence services that are hostile to China could draw China into costly long-term engagements that diminish its wealth or standing. But the mechanism is going to be a bit different. Instead of targeting Chinese troops, these intelligence services would be targeting Chinese assets, gem and mineral mines, resource harvesting operations, pipelines, infrastructure, smuggling routes, organized crime groups, and businesses owned or operated by well-connected Chinese nationals. But that sort of undermining operation isn't loud, it isn't easy to spot, and even if it does get messy, it'll typically be getting messy either in dense jungles under the fog of war, or in the digital space where any chaos will be hidden from outside observers. But at the same time, the US might want to tread carefully in Myanmar because the wrong sorts of disruptions in the wrong places could lead to major supply chain issues for rare earth elements. China has a near monopoly on rare earth processing and sale, but actually extracts a huge proportion of these minerals from Myanmar, where lucrative mines are the starting point in a chain that leads all the way to American technology. Act too hastily, or against the wrong targets, or in a way that risks discovery, and America could do more harm to itself by causing a cutoff of rare earths than it could ever hope to do to China. Next question comes from Kenny Berger 5377. Why did the Gulf War only take 4 days, but the global war on terror took 20 plus years? Well, big question. The answer is pretty simple, and it comes down to the question of when America's adversaries think they're beaten. The Gulf War was a nation-against-nation conflict, where a US-led coalition was going up against the nation and military of Iraq. And for Iraq to be able to keep up the fight against the US, they needed to have a few things going for them. They'd need to have a functioning military, stable supply lines, control over their airspace, or at least the ability to contest it, and soldiers who were both breathing and willing to fight for Saddam Hussein in the hundreds of thousands. By the end of a 100-hour offensive, Iraq had none of those things, and Baghdad considered itself to be defeated, and rightly so. Compare that to the global war on terror, where Americans' adversaries had exactly zero expectation that they'd defend their nation, because they didn't have a nation. The goal of Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, the Islamic State, and all the other myriad groups that the US fought during those years was to run an asymmetric insurgency, not to defend any national sovereignty. Their objective in fighting the US was to inflict cost on the US in order to extract concessions, change America's behavior, and accomplish other goals that had little to do with the idea of collective or at times even personal survival. The Gulf War was over in 4 days because when the US inflicted catastrophic losses on Iraq, Iraqi leaders looked at that situation and decided that it was no longer in their interest to fight. When the US inflicted catastrophic losses on its adversary in the war on terror, they looked at that situation and decided that it was an acceptable price to pay in order to carry on the fight. Unfortunately for the United States, Washington took far too long to understand the true importance of that distinction, and to understand that unless they intended a war of extermination, there would never be a right time to declare victory. Next up, Classical History Rebirth says, I absolutely love your channel and shout out to the team. My question is, do you think Europe has enough worldwide influence to affect current and future conflicts? It seems like their political strength over the past few years has decreased rapidly and sent much more power to the US and Asian nations. And to that, we can only respond by pointing out that Europe's lack of global political influence is a problem of Europe's own bloody making. Combine the economic power of all the nations of the EU as well as Britain, and Europe's collective economy is second only to the United States. It overpowers China, it dwarfs India and Japan, and it eclipses Russia by a factor of 10 to 1. Militarily, the nations of Europe combine to leverage massive quantities of some of the best hardware on Earth, plus well over 2 million troops, and the military-industrial potential, if not the actual infrastructure, to be a dominant force on the global stage. Make no mistake, if you put all of Europe's component parts together and assume perfect efficiency in how they operate, you absolutely get a superpower. But it's by assuming perfect efficiency, or honestly, any efficiency, that you lose sight of the European continent that actually, exists in real life. Decades ago, at a lot of different moments and for a lot of different reasons, Europe and its leaders made a choice to prioritize stability, unity, military downsizing, and leave aside questions of geopolitical dominance or military-industrial might. Europe in the 21st century is a strange thing, because on the one hand, it is united into a European Union. It embraces collective defense via NATO, and all of its constituent nations get along pretty well. But on the other hand, it is stagnant, it is stuffy, it's drowned in red tape, and it's slowed down the process of decision-making so dramatically that even if it were to stand up to a global adversary, it would first spend who knows how long deliberating on whether to shove that adversary and tell it to pay attention, before then taking several hours where their adversary has to wait patiently until Europe can get a consensus on the words that should come out of its mouth next. If every decision you made was predicated on the consensus of 30-odd voices in your head that all had different opinions, plus veto power, and the voice with the British accent refuse to be a part of the conversation while still insisting that no big decisions are to be made without its input, well, you probably wouldn't get much done either, would you? If the last few years have shown Europe anything, then hopefully it's shown Europe that when the continent puts aside its beloved bureaucracy, acts decisively, and speaks with a mostly unified voice, if unanimity isn't possible, then Europe can actually get things done. When that happens, Europe can influence the course of current and future conflicts across the globe. It can make peace and even prevent wars. The only thing holding Europe back is Europe itself. And last in our conflict section for the day, I go to answer this one directly from CC Lilford 2916. Was Somalia, and now Eritrea, really the first time people or a government from a country you covered significantly pushed back against your coverage? How do you balance being respectful with journalistic integrity? And for me to personally answer this one, what I would say is that it was the first time where I really remembered it seeming serious. I think since starting the WarFronts channel and covering more modern and a little bit spicy stuff where, we dig in pretty hard on some countries, yeah, things have gotten a little bit more spicy in my inbox, certainly. I think, and before that, it was mostly just, individual people, or sometimes their lawyers saying, I don't like that you said that. And I'd just be like, all right, mate. Evan says, in addition to everything Simon has said, which wasn't very much, but it was pretty simple, you bring up an interesting point about respect, because while there are groups that we work diligently to honor here at WarFronts, national governments are not among them, no matter which government we're talking about. In general, the people we'd like to show our respect to, by default, fall into two groups. You, the incredible community whose viewership and curiosity makes our work possible, and the innocent civilians caught in the middle of the conflicts that we discuss through no fault or ill intent of their own. As for pushback on our coverage, the approach we take toward ourselves is the same that we take toward any other outlet. If the coverage was inaccurate, then that issue needs to be fixed. But when nations like Somalia and now Eritrea have offered their specific style of pushback against our coverage, the problem isn't really that our coverage is inaccurate. It's that our coverage is inconvenient. We are a small organization, for now, and we don't yet have the resources to position our own journalists or recruit partners on the ground in global conflict zones, so we really do rely on the most credible source material we can find to provide more direct coverage of affairs on the ground in the places we talk about. But both times that we've heard from alleged instruments of foreign governments recently, it's been to push a narrative that directly and obviously contradicts the credible reporting that we've relied on. When that happens, we check our sources, we investigate specific contradictions, we evaluate the claim from Somalia or Eritrea that basically says we got the entire thing completely backwards, and you know what? Funnily enough, we consistently discover that they're pushing a carefully manicured alternative reality that misrepresents the actual state of affairs. What? And do we here at WarFronts feel the need to be respectful in calling that out? No. All right, and now all the dreary war stuff's over, it's time to move on to some behind-the-scenes questions and other bits of fun. For this section, I, Simon, will be answering most of the questions myself, although Evan will pitch on a couple of them, starting with a question from Kaliran. I'm sorry. Hi, Simon. I love the amazing work of the whole team as a Czech myself. Oh, hello there, friend. Dobrý den. Why did you decide to move to Prague? How do you like the Czech Republic in comparison to Great Britain? I have been here over a decade now. I think that says enough. I like it here a lot. I think one of the things I was actually talking with my family about this recently, and if you'll permit me to waffle a little bit, what I like about Czech Republic is it feels like it's on the up. Like, where I am, you'll find that a shitty grocery store will close and a bistro will open. Whereas I find in the UK, you go there and instead a bistro closes and like a vape shop that also sells mobile phones opens. I don't know why, it just feels a little bit sad. As for why I moved to Czech Republic, specifically Prague, in the first place, well, after university, I did an internship in Sri Lanka, in the little teardrop country next to India. And on that same internship was a girl who became my girlfriend and now became my wife. And she's Czech, and I moved here to be with her. And now we're married and we have 2 kids who I call Romulus and Remus. Lego Gators asks, in the back of my mind, I for some reason remember you being in the Navy. Oh, I see. Is that true or am I delulu? If true, does it color your interpretations of any of the news you cover here? I definitely haven't been in the Navy. I can see where the confusion might have come from though, because I was in the CCF, the Combined Cadet Forces, when I was at school, and I was in the Navy section. And so I did that for like 5 years. It was great. You learn how to shoot like a big gun. You wear a uniform. I liked it. Yeah, it was fun. But no, I was never in the actual Navy. Although I did consider it very briefly as a career. Yaniv Kasuto4198 says, I'm still waiting on a full review of the Syrian civil war, to which Evan says that we've got fantastic news for you. You can listen to our episode, The Syrian Civil War, A Downward Spiral to Madness, on the channel right now, as well as a deep dive on the fall of the Assad regime that we published back in December last year, as well as a deep dive on Syrian reconstruction, which was published this past April. You're so welcome. But that being said, we haven't yet written an hour-long magnum opus on the configs yet. Who knows if that might be coming soon. Harry Taylor 9564 asks, will WarFronts ever look into working with or employing on-the-ground journalists and researchers? I love your work, but was wondering if, with the growing platform, you'll move to first-hand research and journalism. Obviously, this would be extremely cool. I would like that. Financially, right now, that's not going to work for us. We have been planning, and maybe I'll be speaking out of turn here because we have been having a lot of trouble getting our payment processor sorted. I mean, Paddle, what the
They're like, your content is a little bit inappropriate.
And I'm like, what are you talking about? Anyway, this might just be all nonsense to you and you have no idea what I'm talking about, but we are working on ways to grow the business, to get more money coming in so we can have more money going out, which can mean things like this. Obviously, it would be extremely cool to be sitting at the head of a news organization that can do this sort of thing. I would love that. I hope it can become possible. Genuinely working on it. Next, from Lock B1Q, someone has to stand up and be brave enough to ask the important questions. What's your favorite flavor of pie? Oh no, I don't really like pie. I'm just not a big pie man. Simon the Pie Man is just, no. I like cakes, like, which is kind of like a pie, like, you know, the cakes with a pastry like a cheesecake, but doesn't have the top on. Just not a big pie person. But Evan says there's no better pie than a simple key lime pie. I have no idea what that is. With a graham cracker crust, I have no idea what that is. That's been stuck in the freezer for several hours before you eat it. The cold plus the sourness of the limes is god tier. I can't explain it. That sounds extremely tasty, Evan. I was just thinking of like savory pies. Pumpkin pie. Pumpkin pie is very nice. I take it back. I like pumpkin pie. Maybe I just don't like savory pies. I'm sorry, you're not here for this waffling. Let's carry on. The next question from CMJF1U. All right. What's the coolest dictator or absolute monarch in your opinion? Who's the coolest dictator? Evan goes first, I guess. He says, never a great look to even have a favorite dictator locked, loaded, and ready to go. But let's be real, I absolutely do. Ever since I learned about him, I've been fascinated by Portuguese dictator Antonio Salazar, who ruled Portugal under the Estado Novo regime from the 1930s until he fell into a coma in 1968. He was a skilled economist who built his regime not on communism, not on fascism, but on corporatism, and basically ruled as a puppet master much more than he was ever a strongman. Oh my god, I know who I'm choosing from this. I know who I'm choosing. It's basically the same thing, but in another part of the world. He was a very different sort of dictator, leading European nation at the same time as Hitler, Franco, and Mussolini, although he still did find time to engage in all manner of despotic shit. Oh, my choice didn't. I mean, not on the same level. A little bit later, you'll see who it is. Can you guess who it is yet? Also, no, my answer isn't Bukele, and it isn't Traore. If you have to spend all your time telling people how cool you are...
You are not cool.
My go, Lee Kuan Yew. The Singapore dude, Lee Kuan Yew. I probably should have looked this up before I gave this answer. But basically, Singapore was a swamp. And he was like, I'm going to make this rich and safe and nice. And that's exactly what he did. I mean, he's not like exactly a dictator, I suppose. But he was pretty heavy-handed. And still, everyone in Singapore loves him and loved him. And even the outside world was like, nah, he is a bit heavy-handed. But Look, it was a swamp, and now there's not even chewing gum, and everyone's rich. Finally, Minsk Helka asks, how far away is Elon Musk from creating a PMC and calling them his cyber operations culture killers? But before we get to that, this episode is brought to you by Cyber Operations Culture Killers. Elon Musk's totally not a PMC private army. Why settle for boring old contractors in camo when you could have SpaceX veterans in chrome body armor? These guys don't just storm compounds, they storm discourse. Need a coup in a mid-sized country? They'll get it trending with a hashtag before the first drone even takes off. Each unit comes standard with Neuralink headsets, flamethrower sidearms, and a surprisingly affordable subscription plan. So sign up today and get your first 3 mercenaries free with the promo code SENDHELP. Cyber Operations Culture Killers, because why just disrupt industries when you can disrupt governments? Thank you for watching. That was a joke. We're not sponsored by them. I don't want to get any letters from Elon Musk. And his very expensive lawyers.